The first blank space needs to be filled with a verb that fits the context of maintaining hydration and health by taking in fluids. Out of all the given options, only consume meets this criteria. The other words either do not make sense grammatically, like headaches, tired, varied, hydrated, humble, hardness, or contextually, like enlist, in the sentence. The second blank space in the sentence needs to be filled with the word hydrated because it is the only option that correctly conveys the intended meaning. The context of the sentence discusses the importance of consuming enough fluid to maintain the body's water content. The state of having enough water in the body is referred to as being hydrated. The other words do not fit in this context. The third blank space should be filled with tired because it is the most logical option given the context. The sentence discusses the physical consequences of not consuming enough fluid. Among the provided options, tired is the only one that fits this context because it is a symptom of dehydration. The other words either don't make sense, like enlist, varied, or humble, or don't represent physical symptoms that can be caused by lack of fluid intake, like hardness. The fourth blank space needs to be filled with headaches because it has to be a word that refers to a consequence of not getting enough fluid. The word headaches fits this context best because it is a common symptom of dehydration. The other words provided do not logically complete the sentence as they do not represent adverse effects of not drinking enough water. The first blank space should be filled with result because the sentence is discussing the consequences, or results, of chemical changes within the body. The other words do not accurately represent the outcomes or effects of these chemical processes. The second blank space must be filled with signal because the context of the sentence is describing the process of neurologic signaling. The influx and efflux of ions across a neuron's membrane cause electrical changes that lead to the transmission of a signal from one end to the other. The other suggested words, result, prerequisite, situation, usage, storage, do not correctly describe or fit into the context of neurological transmission. The third blank space, storage, is the most suitable word because it denotes the action of the protein in the blood that holds onto the oxygen as it passes through the lungs before being used by the body. Neither result, prerequisite, situation, signal, nor usage accurately convey this function. The fourth blank space needs to be filled with usage because it designates further utilization or consumption of the described process. The context is about how oxygen is stored in blood as it goes through the lungs. After that, naturally, the oxygen will be used by various parts of the body, hence, the word usage is the most suitable. The other words like result, prerequisite, situation, signal, or storage do not fit this context logically or semantically. The word converted fits best in the first blank space because it implies that the mangrove swamps have been transformed for human use. The second blank space should be filled with accounting as it refers to financial considerations and costs, aligning with the context of the sentence. For the third blank, comprised is the most suitable word as it means consist of or make up, detailing what the ecosystem losses include, such as damage to the supply of foods and medicines, loss of habitats for fish, and reduced buffering against storms. Finally, productive is the appropriate word for the fourth blank space, describing a shrimp farm that is actively producing shrimp and generating income. The other options do not fit the context or provide a logical meaning to the sentences. In this context, the first blank space should be filled with however to introduce a contrasting point about color preferences, indicating that individual responses can vary significantly. The second blank space should be filled with widely to show the broad range of individual responses. The third blank space should be filled with factors as it refers to various influences on color preferences, such as fashion trends and peer pressure. Lastly, the fourth blank space should be filled with other than to show exclusion, suggesting boys may not prefer colors outside those associated with their favorite football teams. The first blank space should be filled with both because it connects the temperature and speed of sound, indicating they change together as altitude increases. The second blank space should be filled with remains as it acts as a linking verb, showing the temperature stays steady after 36,000 feet. The third blank space should be filled with variation to emphasize the change in speed of sound at different altitudes. The fourth blank space should be filled with from to indicate the range of speeds in the transonic band, from Mach 0.8 to Mach 1.2. The first blank space needs to be filled with interpreted instead of the other options because this word fits the context correctly. The sentence is describing how these artists have taken the discussions they've had with scientists and translated, or interpreted, them into images. The other words do not make sense in this context. Involved and discriminated do not fit the action being done by the artists. Dreamed and forsook are not congruent with the objective perspective implied, and system and series are nouns, so they don't function properly in a position where a verb is needed. The second blank space has to be filled with series because it provides the most contextually fitting meaning to the sentence. The listed artists are said to have discussed with scientists and then represented these conversations in various forms of images. Therefore, it logically follows that these images were created in a series or a sequence. None of the other options, involved, dreamed, discriminated, interpreted, forsook, system, would allow the sentence to communicate this meaning effectively. The third blank space must be filled with involved because the context of the sentence refers to the technology that is used or involved in alternative futures and the explanation of it. None of the other choices, dreamed, discriminated, interpreted, forsook, system, series, fit into this context logically or grammatically. The first blank space should be filled with civilization because Mayan civilization is a common term used to describe an ancient society, and the article discusses the reasons for its disappearance. The second blank space should be filled with period as it refers to a specific length of time during which there was little or no rainfall, consistent with the context of a 200-year drought. The third blank space should be filled with research because it refers to the evidence needed to support the theory about overfarming and drought leading to famine. Geological research is a common term for studies related to the Earth's features, making it the most appropriate choice. The first blank space should be filled with essential because it describes the basic and necessary concepts in chemistry. The second blank space should be filled with order as it refers to the systematic way of mastering different knowledge. The third blank space should be filled with top because it suggests starting from the highest point and working down. The fourth blank space should be filled with build as it means to develop based on understanding units, conversion, and how atoms and molecules interact. The first blank space should be filled with campus because it refers to a location within the university named Noosa. The second blank space should be filled with began as it indicates the starting point of David's career. The third blank space should be filled with progressing to describe the advancement to 4 principal positions. The fourth blank space should be filled with entering as it means starting to work in higher education after the principal positions. The first blank space should be filled with distinguishing because it describes a feature that sets business apart due to its economic character. The second blank space should be filled with accompanied as it indicates that trading often occurs together with hard bargaining. The third blank space should be filled with engage because it describes both sides participating in some bluffing. The fourth blank space should be filled with versed as it means being skilled in the art of arousing a customer's attention. The fifth blank space should be filled with clinch because it means to successfully finalize and secure the sale. The first blank space should be filled with vegetable because tomatoes are commonly referred to as vegetables in gardening and cooking contexts. The second blank space should be filled with food as it emphasizes the nutritional value of tomatoes. The third blank space should be filled with culture because it refers to the ease of growing tomatoes. The fourth blank space should be filled with wild as it describes species that grow naturally in South America. The fifth blank space should be filled with used because it indicates that tomati was the name adopted by Native Americans for the tomato. The first blank space should be filled with plateaued because it describes how urban development reached a state of little or no change after a long period of progress. The second blank space should be filled with equitable as it highlights that cities are not becoming fairer or more just. The third blank space should be filled with bleak because it describes a depressing or hopeless future for cities based on current statistics. The first blank space should be filled with recorded because it describes how the medical use of plants has been documented on ancient papyrus and clay tablets. The second blank space should be filled with translated as it indicates that Dioscorides' herbal book was converted into Latin and Arabic. The third blank space should be filled with survives because it means that the manuscript still exists today. The fourth blank space should be filled with prescribed as it describes the pills and potions that physicians advised and authorized. The first blank space should be filled with figure because it refers to a prominent or distinguished person, implying Bentham had become well known by the 1820s. The second blank space should be filled with preserved as it describes the action taken to maintain Bentham's skeleton for display as the order icon. The third blank space should be filled with of because it shows what the aim is directed towards, which is producing the first scholarly edition of his works and correspondence. The fourth blank space should be filled with transcribe as it means to make a written copy of Bentham's manuscripts. The first blank space should be filled with classes because it implies that students are running the restaurant as part of their coursework. The second blank space should be filled with quality as skeptics might doubt the standard of a student-run restaurant. The third blank space should be filled with return because it talks about revisiting the restaurant for a second taste. The fourth blank space should be filled with actually to emphasize that understanding ratios and proportions in cooking truly teaches students how to cook. The fifth blank space should be filled with menu as it symbolizes the practice of using all aspects of a product in cooking, reflecting Gami's belief system. The first blank space should be filled with extended because it indicates a prolonged period of time that students live away from home. The second blank space should be filled with definite as it describes the clear-cut separation from home. The third blank space should be filled with lonely because it fits the context of struggling with forming friendships. The fourth blank space should be filled with socially to describe the type of success in forming friendships. The fifth blank space should be filled with frightening as it describes the intimidating aspect of increased personal freedom. The sixth blank space should be filled with backgrounds because it refers to the diverse characteristics of roommates that affect their values and expectations. The first blank space should be filled with contained because it indicates that mercury is a component of the products mentioned. The second blank space should be filled with show as barometers indicate changes in weather. The third blank space should be filled with regulate because thermostats control the temperature of buildings. The other verbs do not accurately convey these relationships or functions. The first blank space should be filled with tracking because it describes the action of the wristwatch collecting and recording information such as a person's pulse or movement. The second blank space should be filled with detects as it indicates the watch's capability to perceive changes in a person's health. The third blank space should be filled with located because it accurately describes the placement of the touchscreen hub in relation to the home. The fourth blank space should be filled with alerts as it describes the hub's function of notifying or warning predetermined contacts.